Last Sunday, when you started this thing with us, it was transformational for me. I have my bracelet on. I am really looking forward to, I know we are all looking forward to seeing where God takes us today. Thanks.
Thanks, Paul. Y'all pray with me this morning? God, what a beautiful thing your body is, a place where we can laugh together, where we can recognize all the things about life that sometimes cause stress or humor in our own homes. And at the same time, God, we can come to this place and others can lead us to worship at your throne, to be reminded of the chains coming off, of the offer you've made us and your great love for us. So, Lord, I just pray that you meet us here this morning as you promised to do. Speak to us from your word. Teach us clearly. Take me out of the way. Let us hear from your word, from your spirit. And God, bless us as we dig into an old part of our Bible to understand not just that you love us, but that you have a plan for us. Thank you for Jesus. Amen. Okay, I want to see if you can relate to this in 2011. I've been a Christian for a number of years, and something that has happened over the course of my Christian journey is I have picked up 2 different testimonies. One I got from listening to other Christians. The other one is more useful and is actually more honest. So I want to share those with you, and then I want to see if you can tell which is which, and if maybe this has been true to your own journey. A testimony is just a story of your life in God's hands. What has he done with you? It's kind of like looking into a mirror of who you are. And here's my first testimony. I was lost. I trusted Jesus. Look at me now. It's awesome. Okay, that's the first one. See if you can tell the difference. Here's the other one. Starts in the same place. I was lost. Jesus found me because I was too blind and foolish to look for him. And then I put myself together. I quit cussing. I quit speeding. I tried to quit being sexual. I boycotted all kinds of things, Christian movies and Christian music only in my life, and I removed all the lost people from my life. And Jesus put up with that for a little while, and then he began to peel layers off my life and expose the deep, deep, dark places in my heart. And where I thought that I had been pure on the outside, he showed me a dirtiness on the inside, and he made that part of his story in my life. And where I thought I had been spiritual because I kept rules, he showed me that obsessive compulsive is not the same as being spiritual. And where I thought that I was on top of the world, he revealed this deep insecurity in me, and a mission project in Jamaica began to pull the grip off my own life. And where I thought I was loving people well, he showed me that I spent most of my time judging people instead of loving them. And he slowly began to rebuild me, with me no longer being the focus of my life. Do you relate to that? Do you have 2 different stories, the clean one and the real one? One that's about you, one that's actually about him. As a young Christian, I used to look into my life, and I'd try to look into my future like a mirror, and I would spend a lot of time looking into that mirror. And one thing that was always there whenever I would look at the future was me. I was right there in the middle of everything. And so I could imagine God using me, and me serving God, and God making me better and better and bigger and bigger. And then it didn't really happen that way. And I got kind of discouraged and maybe even disappointed with God, and I wondered if he'd not been looking at the same mirror I was looking at. And I started to question my testimony, I started to question my own future, and I started to question whether or not God really had a plan for my life. Anybody? Because it wasn't awesome like I thought it would be. Sometimes it was difficult, and he was showing me all this junk in myself. God does have a plan for your life. The problem for most of us is we do what I did and we get confused about what the point of the plan is, and we probably don't actually understand the plan yet. And neither did the prophet Hosea. Hosea is a guy who lived about 750 BC. And Hosea is a guy who was used powerfully by God, as many of the prophets in the Old Testament were. All of these guys living near the same time period. God would speak through them so that they could speak to his people before the word had been written down. And Hosea understood pieces of the plan, but he didn't understand the whole thing yet. And that's okay. If you were here last Sunday, as Paul mentioned, in these bracelets that showed up, you can ask somebody who has one of them a little more information about what prophets were. But I want to give you a quick timeline, because when we get into the Old Testament, one of the things that happens to many of us is we just get lost, because there's a lot of stuff back there. So settle into this for a minute with me and see if you can follow. Just kind of give you an anchor. At the beginning of the story, you have creation. You've got God himself speaking into the creation of man and woman, of Adam and Eve. And you move up a few years and you get the flood. You get God's judgment on the earth that man and woman and all of their offspring were wicked. So he wipes it clean. He starts over. You get a guy like Noah about then. You go forward a little bit further and you get these patriarchs, the fathers of what would become God's people, Israel, Abraham and Isaac and Jacob, men with whom God began to build a relationship and to set down what it will mean to be his people. Things went wrong, and you jump into the Exodus story. God's people ended up in slavery, and then he raises up this man, Moses, to lead them out of the slavery. And after that time, God's people lived, and they would seek after him for a time, and they'd wander away, and he would raise up leaders to bring them back on track. And you get this whole section of the judges. People like Samson are in there, or Ruth. Her story fits in the period of the judges. And then finally, you have the kings. God gives them human leaders the way other nations had, and you get guys like David and Solomon. And at the end of that period, and overlapping some with those kings, you have the prophets. People God would send to correct the nation, to give them his word, to communicate with them. And you get guys like Isaiah or Elijah, and this guy, Hosea. You with me? It's a lot of stuff. And God had a plan for Hosea's life, and Hosea could look into part of it, and he could see some in the mirror, almost like looking into a mirror dimly, but he couldn't understand all of what it was yet. And maybe it's the same for us. Sometimes we don't get the plan completely. But in the same way God asked Hosea to surrender to it, to trust him, to obey him, he asks us to surrender to that plan, to trust him with it, to obey and follow. And in hindsight, someday we may get to understand what he was doing, even if we can't fully get it now. When we look into Hosea's life, just like into this mirror, God is going to change for us what's reflected back. And we're going to get to see that God had a plan for Hosea's life. He had a plan for Hosea's story, the words he would tell to us. And he had a plan for Hosea's identity. His very name had a plan. So we're going to dig in at chapter 1 in Hosea and find out that God has the same things for you. The struggle for us is you're going to have to decide what you do with it. So Hosea chapter 1, verse 1. It's near the end of your Old Testament. I'm blinding people with the mirror. Sorry about that. I'll be careful. I'm going to be careful with some other things in Hosea too. The kids are with us today. And I'm going to come to a word in a minute that in my translation is a really shocking word. And I think it's there on purpose because when God tells this story, it's supposed to be kind of shocking. I'm not going to use that word. Some of your translations will use prettier words like adultery or prostitution. So I won't say it. It's really shocking. It sounds kind of like a French food, like hors d'oeuvres. That's all I'm going to say. Okay, so we'll be careful as we read through. I'm just going to say naughtiness, and you can read it. And if you were here last week and it hasn't sunk in for you yet, when God describes that woman with that word, he's talking about you. In the story of Hosea, we're that woman. So just in case you thought maybe God really didn't mean to save you, he did. You're in there. He includes you in the story. Chapter 1, verse 1. You there? It says, the word of the Lord that came to Hosea, the son of Beeri, in the days of Uzziah, Jotham, Ahaz, and Hezekiah, kings of Judah, which is the southern kingdom, and in the days of Jeroboam, which would be Jeroboam the second, the son of Joash, king of Israel, in the northern kingdom. When the Lord first spoke through Hosea, the Lord said to Hosea, here it is, go take to yourself a wife of naughtiness, and have children of naughtiness, for the land commits great naughtiness by forsaking the Lord. I mean, really? You got to make sure you see this and you don't miss this part of the story. Some of you have probably done this. At some point in your life, you've sat down and you've kind of drawn out a goal of setting thing or a plan for your life. And maybe you've done it with another believer and you've prayed over this and said at 1 year and 3 years and 5 years and even 10 and 20, Lord, here's what, based on what you've been in our life, what you've done, we think maybe this is the direction you would take our family or me. And you pray over that and you think, so I'm going to move that direction unless you show me differently, God, and you submit it to the Lord. Anybody ever done that? It's a good practice. Here's a question. If you've ever done it, how many of you wrote down on your page, as you're thinking of what God might do with your plan, you're looking into your mirror, said, I want to marry a prostitute and raise her children? Anybody? That wasn't on your plan? I don't know a lot about prophets. I'm pretty sure it wasn't on Hosea's either. I really doubt that Hosea looked at his life and thought, oh, yeah, that's what I'm going to do. You got to understand this to get this story. Hosea's life has just been severely altered. Whatever he thought was going to happen, God is going to change radically. In verse 3, so he does it. He went and took Gomer, the name of Diblaim, and she conceived and bore him a son. Her name's Gomer. We don't know much about her. The name in Hebrew could mean cease or fail. I kind of like fail. It's usually a guy's name. This just gets better, right? It's like a Johnny Cash song. I married a dude named Fail. The first child, it tells us there, was Hosea's. Pay attention to that. He's going to represent a coming judgment. The name Jezreel means God will scatter. I'm going to spread you out. I'm going to cast you out of this nation because of some things that had gone on in their recent history. In verse 6, she conceived again. Doesn't say whose it was this time. That'll be more important in a minute. And the Lord said to him, call her name No Mercy. In Hebrew, that's Lo Ruhama. Pay attention to that. Mark that down the back of your head. That's going to show up later. Her name is going to be No Mercy. That's what you're going to name your daughter. For I will have no mercy on the house of Israel to forgive them at all. But I will have mercy on the house of Judah, the north and the southern. He's speaking about differently. And I will not save them by bow or by sword or by war or by horses or horsemen. So at this point, he's making sure Hosea is telling the people, you guys are like adulterous woman to me. And I want you to name your kids to reflect this. Make sure they know I'm going to have no mercy on your kingdom, but I am going to have mercy on the southern kingdom. And what we know historically is that Israel, the place where Hosea was, is going to be destroyed by Assyria pretty soon. But the southern kingdom is going to live on another 150, 200 years and then be destroyed by Babylon. That name is really important, No Mercy. In verse 8, when she had weaned No Mercy, she conceived and bore a son. And the Lord said, call his name, Not My People, for you are not my people, and I am not your God. You think this is Hosea's kid? Kind of doubtful, right? Husbands, don't do this. Don't insist with your wife. I think we'll name my child Not Mine.